Hello, 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 and welcome back to our weekly Sunday school lesson. I am Elder Latanya Milliken of the All Nations Church in Oakland, California, and this is lesson 13 of our summer quarter. We're wrapping up the summertime, and the date of our lesson is August the 28th, the 28th, 2022, and we're in the book of Acts, the 28th chapter, the first to the 10th verse. Our subject today is Miracle on Malta, and we're going to wrap up this quarter. But before we do that, I am on my patio. I'm no longer in San Antonio, and I'm no longer videotaping with family members. One of the reasons is I tested positive for COVID, and I'm in the process of isolating, so I didn't want to do the video inside, nor would anyone else to expose them. In fact, one of the challenges is just staying isolated and keeping others away and not exposed to COVID. I've been wiping down doorknobs and handles and spraying Lysol, staying in my bedroom. But I do have victory. It was not as severe as it may have. Should I say it could have been. I'm thankful that I did get the shots and the booster, and so getting it through my system. And so here we are on the patio. So you may hear cars and birds. I did hear a crow behind me, and just environmental noise. But just focusing on our lesson today. It's a great lesson. But before we get started, I want to give some birthday shout outs. Today is Jayleah's birthday. We're videotaping the day prior, which is the 27th. I want to say happy birthday to Jayleah. That's my niece. She's serving her country, and we're so proud of you, sweetie. Keep on keeping on and doing phenomenal as you are. Then on tomorrow, the 28th, is Christian's, my nephew, Carla's youngest son. It's his birthday. He lives in San Antonio, Texas. Happy birthday, Christian. And we are looking forward to him when he accepts his calling into the ministry. He has, it's been prophesied that he's going to preach the gospel. So we're waiting on you, Christian. We know in God's timing. Happy birthday to you, sweetie. And then on Monday, it's my hero's birthday. My one and only hero, my father, Pastor Emeritus Felton Milliken, who has transitioned to heaven and is prayerfully looking down on us and really smiling, hopefully proud of what we are accomplishing in ministry. And so happy birthday, Daddy. We love you and we miss you. So if you're celebrating a birthday, happy birthday. And any events that you're celebrating, may God be with you in all your endeavors. So let's get to our lesson today. So last week we learned, we talked about Paul. Paul was healed by Ananias. I want to kind of regroup that and bring it full circle. So let me just give you a few details on that lesson and kind of bridge the gap, and then we'll talk about this lesson, the miracles at Malta, because this is all about Paul. And we've spent, if you've been on this journey with me, we've spent a lot talking about Paul. We've learned so much from Paul. But here last week, the lesson talked about when Paul was converted. He was a Pharisee. Originally, he was against the Christians. He was on his way to Damascus. Yes, there's that word again, Damascus, which was 135 miles north of Jerusalem. He had been ordered by the high priest to arrest Christians, bring them back to Jerusalem so that they could be tried. And on his way, he had an experience. He was encountered this. The scripture describes it as this brilliant light, and in this light he was blinded, fell off his horse, and he had this dialogue with Jesus, and Jesus asked him, "Why are you persecuting me?" And he says, "Well, who are you?" But what Jesus was referring to, when you persecute the Christians, the believers, his followers, then you're persecuting him. And so the result of this is that Paul received his calling, and he was blinded and was sent to Ananias. He received a vision that he was supposed to go and meet with Ananias. And so Ananias also received the vision that he would have to go and pray for Saul so that he could receive his vision. And so we talked about all of that last week, and how the scales fell off of Paul's eyes, and he was baptized, and he began preaching the gospel. And so Paul began his missionary journey. He preached. He had 3 missionary campaigns, and he suffered a lot through ministry. He had to deal with he had to deal with oh my God, my tongue has been tied. He had to deal with a lot being in ministry. For those of us, we understand that, right? And so after his return to Jerusalem, and after his 3rd missionary journey, he was arrested and imprisoned for several years by the Roman authorities. And we know one of the difficulties in mortality, that when you serve for the kingdom of God, it's not always easy. It comes with great challenges. And so we will learn that Paul began his journey, but as he went through different things in his life, his faith grew. And so he's in prison, and he's being tried, but he's a Roman citizen. And as a Roman citizen, then he had the privilege of appealing to Caesar. And Caesar was in Rome. And so he began this journey while he was arrested. He was still in prison. He went through trial, but he appealed, and now he was being taken from where he was in Jerusalem to Rome. And on this journey, it was by ship, okay? And he was assigned a captain, an imperial captain, to guard him. And they stopped at many ports, and we're getting close. We're getting close to starting our lesson, but all of this kind of ties in to our lesson. It connects the dots. So we see Paul's conversion, we see him starting his ministry, then he's arrested while he's in his ministry, and he's traveling again to Rome. And this was a part of his destiny, because Paul had been called to preach to the Gentile nation and to kings and to leaders. And so he had to get to Rome, because he had to share his story with the leaders and the kings there in Rome. And so he was now on his way, back to our story, he was now on his way to Rome by ships, and they were going to several small ports, and the trip was taking longer than anticipated, and it was getting closer to fall, and winter was really a difficult time to travel by sea. And so Paul had warned his captain that it would be difficult to travel, and they would lose a lot of things if they would travel, but they wouldn't listen to him. And so they took the journey, and as they took the journey, they fell into a storm, and this storm was so bad that they couldn't see the stars, they couldn't see the sun, and they became hopeless. And on the 14th night, okay, I'm a little congested, 14th night of this storm, they noticed that they were getting closer to sea. And so, long story short, Paul had been visited by the angel, and the angel had given him instructions to stay with the boat, whatever happens. And so Paul shared that with everyone on the ship. And as they got closer to land, the ship went aground and hit and busted the bottom. And so they, many of them, if they could swim, they swam the shore, and others felt they hung on pieces of the ship, and they all were safe because the Lord had promised Paul that even though they would lose the ship, everyone would be saved. And so here's where we pick up our current lesson is the island or the land that the ship was near was called Melita, current day Malta. And so I'm going to read just a little bit. So if you have your favorite translations, I can read a little bit as I kind of continue to paraphrase the lesson. So if you have your favorite translation, again, we're in Acts the 28th chapter, the first verse, and it reads, "And when they were escaped, then they knew that the island was called Melita. And the barbarous people showed us no little kindness, for they kindled a fire and received us every one, because of the present rain and because of the cold. And when Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and laid them on the fire, there came a viper out of the heat and fastened on his hands. And when the barbarians saw the venomous beast hang on his hand, they said among themselves, 'No doubt this man is a murderer, whom though he has escaped the sea, yet vengeance suffered not to live.' He shook off the beast into the fire," that being Paul. Paul shook off the beast into the fire and felt no harm. Howbeit they looked when he should have swollen or fallen down dead suddenly. But after they had looked a great while and saw no harm come to him, they changed their minds and said that he was a god." And I'm going to pause right there. So Paul, just some key points about Paul. Paul was, even though he was a preacher of the gospel, he helped on board. Like he helped do duties on board, and even when he went ashore, he continued to help with the duties. And so when he saw that they needed wood and the importance of having the fire, he went out to get sticks as well. And so there was a snake that was cold and stiff in the sticks that he picked up, and he threw the sticks along with the snake in the fire. And when the fire hit the snake, it woke up and it bit his hand. And so he just shook it off. But the islanders were able to see the venomous snake, and they were familiar and knew this viper snake was venomous. And so they were waiting to see if he would swell up or if he would pass out and die. But 2 points. One, the Sunday school lesson lets us know that the people were very, very hospitable. They were very friendly. Even though they were, it says barbarian, but that means they were non-Greek, and they were islanders. And they were very civil, and it was civilized, and they were friendly. However, when they saw Paul, they understood that Paul was a prisoner. And when they saw the snake bit him, they automatically assumed, because they were superstitious. They were not Christians. They were superstitious. They just knew that he would fall dead, and that they believed in karma, and that if you were a criminal, then bad things would happen to you. And so they were saying, since the sea did not get its vengeance from him being a criminal, then of course this viper snake would get revenge from him being a criminal. And when that did not happen, they thought of him as a god. And so they were expecting Paul to die, and but Paul shook off the snake, and there was no harm. And so again, Paul witnessed God protecting him, and we can see how God protected in our lesson. We can see how God protected Paul from the sea and the storm, and he got to the island safe. And now he's protecting him when he was bit by this poisonous snake. And so the subject of our lesson, miracles, at Malta. And so one of the miracles is that they were again saved. The whole 276 crew was saved from the storm and from the shipwreck, and Paul being saved from the viperous snake. And so we see this divine protection over Paul. But through many dangers, God had protected Paul. And not only Paul, God had protected Paul because Paul had went through quite a bit. He had escaped hardship. He had been stoned once before. But again, as I mentioned, with each time Paul had these hardships, the Lord would deliver him and his faith would grow. And so Paul knew he needed to get to Rome. Again, it was his destiny to speak before kings. And this lesson, before I run out of time, helps us to see that through hardships in our lives, when we are called to ministry, when we're called as believers, God gets the glory out of these hardships. In these hardships, if you open up your eyes and see, you can see how God brings people to us to minister to and to help in these difficult times. So we see again, Paul is on this island, and he was protected from the snake bite, but he also had one opportunity I wanted to share. He was invited to stay at one of the imperial chiefs of the island's home, him and Luke. And his father, his name was Publius, and Publius' father was sick, and Paul went into him and laid hands on him and prayed for him, and he was healed. Now, there's some important parts about Paul's actions, because the islanders felt like he was a god, since he was able to live through the snake bite, they looked at him as a god. And so with Paul laying hands on Publius's father and praying, he showed that there was a deity or someone higher than him. And when the Lord healed him, they could see that the power came from someone else, and that the glory was someone else. And so Paul began to preach to them, and many came to hear. Many from all quarters of the island came. And the beauty of it is that I want to share this, that Paul was a prisoner, so he could not go out to minister. But the difficulties that happened in his life caused people to come to him. Him being bit by the snake, him having that opportunity to live or to stay with the imperial chief person on the island, him praying for the father, and people hearing, and the word getting out. And as the word got out, people came and they began to hear the gospel, and they began to get prayer. And Luke was a physician along with Paul, was able to help mend and tend to people. And so there's this wonderful, beautiful essence in this story to help us see that even through difficult times, God has a destiny for us. But there are these little intricate opportunities for us to reach people through ministry. Even though you may be confined, God can cause people to come to you. But Paul exercised that opportunity, he took advantage of that opportunity to minister to others. The clarifying, laying on of hands was a symbolic act, signifying the impartation of a divine benefit, that it wasn't him, that the healing was coming from someone else. And I want to note in Mark 16 and 18, Jesus promised his followers would take up serpents and lay hands on the sick, and they shall recover. And this is what Paul was experiencing. And so I have so many more details on this beautiful lesson as we wrap up this quarter. I just wanted to share that Paul was there as we wrap up 3 months, long enough to really minister to the people on that island. And the people blessed them, giving them all of the supplies they had lost in the shipwreck. They were able to wait 3 months. The weather got favorable, and they received gifts and all that they need to travel on. And so I want to, in honor of my mother, read the conclusion of this lesson. So many wonderful, beautiful details, but I want to encourage you. I want to encourage you that even in your difficult times, God has an opportunity for you to minister to others. Remind your students that the next time they're wondering what God is doing in their midst, it might be that God is setting a stage for his next miracle. Note that Paul was always prepared and armed with faith. He was ready when God wanted to use him. We too must be armed with prayer and faith and ready for God when he chooses to use us. Our faithfulness often opens doors for ministry to others in the strangest of ways, and sometimes these come when our lives are badly shipwrecked. I hope you learn some important points from our lesson. Next week we start a series of lessons in Exodus, back to the Old Testament and Leviticus, that teaches us what obedience to God looks like in all kinds of life situations and circumstances. God bless you. Pray for me. Pray for my family. All the best to you. Until next week.